Hello, and welcome to the Candidates Forum presented and produced by the League of Women Voters of Northwest Wayne County. This Candidates Forum for the U.S. Representative in Congress for the 11th District is being recorded on October 16th, 2020. The 11th District looks like a fishhook and covers parts of Wayne and Oakland counties, nearly 25 cities and townships. My name is Paula Bowman, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Northwest Wayne County and also the moderator for today's forum. The League of Women Voters is proud to be a nonpartisan political organization, neither supporting or opposing any candidates or political parties at any level of government. But we always work on vital issues of concern to members and the public. The League does take positions on issues after careful study, so you might see our name attached to an issue that we are advocating or opposing. The League's main mission is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. One of the ways we do that is by having forums such as this one. The League has also prepared a nonpartisan voter guide, which can be found online at vote411.org. Holding a candidates forum by Zoom poses challenges different from an in-person forum. Only League personnel and the candidates are present at the forum, but we did solicit questions from the public in advance so we could ask them at today's forum. Questions were screened for clarity, and any which included personal attacks on candidates were eliminated. There weren't any, but I have to say that. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not of the League of Women Voters. And now we're going to get started with the forum. There are 3 candidates running for the congressional representative for Michigan's 11th District. Haley Stevens, a Democrat, Eric Esshaki, a Republican, both of which are present on the forum, and Leonard Schwartz, a Libertarian. Mr. Schwartz declined to participate in today's forum. The candidates have agreed to a format for today's forum, which is as follows. Each candidate is going to be allowed a 2-minute opening statement, a 1-minute response to most of the questions. If there's a longer time period, we'll let you know, and a 2-minute closing statement. The order that the candidates speak was determined by a random selection process witnessed by the candidates before the recording of the forum began. We will rotate the order of the candidate who responds to a question first. We are, as I have mentioned to both the candidates, we are waiting for our timer, Angela Ryan, to join us, but when she does, she'll be holding up cards that look like this, 30 seconds, and then stop when it's time to stop. Until she gets here, I'll be holding the signs up. We're now going to begin with our opening statements. And if you give me a second, Mr. Esshaki, I'm gonna turn on my stopwatch until Angela gets here. You have 2 minutes for your opening statement. Go ahead.
Well, good morning, Paula, and thank you. It's great to be with you. And I'll tell you, I think we definitely need more civil discourse in our politics. And so I'm happy to be here in this forum and be able to address so many of the important issues that we face these days. A little bit about my background. I grew up in Southgate, Michigan. My dad was an immigrant. He came here from Iraq back in the 70s. He came the legal way because he believed in the American dream. He knew that with hard work and sacrifice, he could create a better life for himself. He passed those general sentiments on to me. I started my professional career as a nurse. I was a nurse for 8 years. During the course of being a nurse, I witnessed some pretty egregious things. I reported that to the state of Michigan, and I was fired for doing it. But I don't regret it. I think that it's important that we stand up for the vulnerable, and it really gave me the path that I'm on now. I went back to law school as a second career because I wanted to solve injustices. I wanted to stand up for inequities, and had the opportunity to graduate from the University of Michigan, and I've been practicing as a lawyer for the last 4 years. I look at what's going on in our politics. they're broken. Our Congress is broken. We have politicians on both sides of the aisle that are more focused on scoring political points to advance their own political careers than they are about actually solving problems and fixing policies so that they begin to work for the American people, for the people in Michigan. So we have an election in less than 3 weeks, and my positions are clear. We need to work to rebuild our economy, defeat COVID-19 and restore our way of life, and bring our manufacturing back here, our supply chains back here to the country, to the state, and ultimately preserve the American dream for future generations, for my 2 boys and the generations like them that are up and coming. So thank you very much.
Right on time. Thank you. Ms. Stevens, your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you so much, Paula, for moderating and doing the timekeeping. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for having this forum. I'm Congresswoman Haley Stevens, and I have helped save Michigan's economy before, and I am ready to do so again. During the Great Recession, when Michigan's auto industry was on the brink, I served as Chief of Staff to President Obama's U.S. Auto Rescue, saving over 200,000 Michigan jobs. And now the amazing communities that I am so proud to represent in Congress, the communities where I was born and raised, are facing tough economic times again. In this first term in Congress, I have been laser focused on Michigan's manufacturing economy, on expanding economic opportunity, and standing up for people's healthcare and our public schools, our students and our teachers. I have led through transparency and accountability, holding frequent town halls and community conversations before the pandemic hit. And then when this pandemic hit, we moved to teletown halls and Facebook Live events. I have also, through my very robust casework management program, been able to put almost $2 million back into the pocketbooks of Michigan's 11th district constituents. I have prioritized federal grants, getting us dollars for our first responders and our manufacturers. Last year, I introduced the Building Blocks of STEM Act, and it was signed into law by President Trump on Christmas Eve. This is a bill to invest in early childhood education and continue to support the next generation of manufacturers. I'm a pragmatist. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats alike. I'm proud to be endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to the Sierra Clubs, to the Michigan Association of Nurses. I've got what it takes to continue to rebuild Michigan's economy and get people back to work safely. That's why I'm running for re-election.
Okay. Mr. Esshaki, we'll start this first question with you. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed all of our lives. Do you respect the CDC's guidelines to prevent the spread of COVID-19? And have you personally followed their guidelines concerning social distancing and wearing a mask in public?
Well, look, I was a nurse for 8 years. I recognize the seriousness of this virus. In fact, my wife lost her grandfather early on to this virus. So we need to take it seriously. I respect the CDC's guidelines. I work as hard as I can to practice common sense precautions, to be prudent, to make sure that we are protecting that 20% of folks who are vulnerable. And I think that we all need to do that. And we all need to be more consistent. We've seen so much inconsistent information coming from all levels of government on both sides of the political aisle, from our CDC, from the World Health Organization. And what we need now moving forward is a plan on how we are going to work to protect that 20% so we can continue to reopen our economy and do it in a safe way. And that means that we need to take standard prudent precautions like mask wearing, like hand washing, like social distancing.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Yes, not only do I follow the CDC guidelines, I've in fact worked with the CDC to implement those guidelines in my role on the House Education and Labor Committee, and have also engaged with our federal agencies on making sure that those guidelines are in the hands of employers and workers alike. In the very early days of the pandemic, the first call I made was to the grocers and the essential workers of Michigan's 11th district, making sure that they had what they needed to do their jobs and to do it safely. We should all be practicing social distancing, mask wearing, and adhering to the guidelines of public safety. And I'm continuing to promote that in my role, and encouraging everyone in the district to do so as well.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, we'll start this next question with you. Do you support the inclusion of $120 billion in additional unemployment assistance proposed by a bipartisan group of lawmakers?
Well, we certainly, since this pandemic hit, have been working in a bipartisan way, Paula, and that has been a big priority of mine. Just yesterday, it was reported that 8 million people have fallen into poverty since this pandemic hit. The worst calls you can get as a member of Congress are from people who are wondering how they're going to pay their bills. And when we passed the CARES Act, we had to bring stability to hardworking Michiganders as well as support to our small businesses. So I'm continuing to push for bipartisan solutions that allow people to get back to work and get back to work safely, as well as solutions that don't leave the hardest hit behind. That goes for hardworking Americans and our small businesses experiencing some of the most devastating effects of this pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, unfortunately, I don't think our response to COVID-19 has been nonpartisan in any aspect of it. And I think it's unfortunate because when we're addressing a global pandemic, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. The reality of it is we're trying to get much needed relief to folks right now. And Nancy Pelosi is holding it up, wanting a whole grab bag of leftist policies. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think that we need to have narrowly focused relief to help folks who are in need of the help. We need a narrowly tailored package so that we can direct those resources as appropriate. We haven't seen that happen. We don't have the sustainability to continue to pass $2 trillion, $3 trillion packages. So this really goes back to, let's get the relief to the folks that need the relief, but let's also have a plan moving forward. And we haven't seen a plan from anybody in government at any level of government. I think it's really unfortunate that folks of Michigan and the 11th Congressional District have suffered as a result.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, this next question you'll start. Department of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has suggested that federal funding may be learning during the pandemic. Do you support this plan?
I'm sorry, the screen cut out. If you could ask.
I'll repeat it. Department of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has suggested that federal funding may be cut off for schools that only offer remote learning during the pandemic. Do you support that plan?
Well, look, I think that everybody has choices to make and how we move forward, and everybody is going to be a part of the solution in how we deal with this COVID-19 virus and the impact that it's had on our economy. We can't just continue to move forward business as usual, because the reality of it is we're not moving forward as business as usual. We need to work to get to that as quickly as possible. So we're all going to have to make sacrifices at some point. I think that our public education is absolutely important. I have two small boys. One of them is preschool, wasn't able to attend this year because they canceled it. So I think that we need to work hard to make sure that our kids are learning. I think we need to work hard to make sure that we have federal funding where it's appropriate and where necessary. But I think we also need to leave a lot of those choices to the local level in terms of how we're going to best service our children and make sure that they're receiving the education that they need so that they don't fall behind.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Look, Paula, Betsy DeVos's agenda has been a disaster for Michigan. It's been a disaster for Michigan schools and for our students. And it's absolutely unconscionable that she'd be threatening to withhold aid and support to our schools that are experiencing a $750 per pupil cut. I get these late night calls from our superintendents who are wondering how they're going to keep the lights on, who are laying off guidance counselors when we need that support more than ever. We need to be investing in public education, getting our teachers a raise, supporting our students who are experiencing something that no generation before them has. And this is what I'm working on in Congress on the Education and Labor Committee, making sure that we're getting those resources for the next generation to go and get a great job in STEM or to make it through this pandemic safely. And I disagree with her threats.
Thank you. This next question is the one where it will be a 2-minute response that you're allowed. You don't have to use the whole 2 minutes, but it's rather complicated. So we wanted to give you some extra time. And Ms. Stevens, we'll start with you. Shortly after the election, the Supreme Court will hear the case brought by the current administration to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Do you support this lawsuit? If the ACA is overturned, do you have an idea for what you would like to see to replace it? Would you make any provisions for people with pre-existing conditions to access affordable health care?
Yeah. Paula, I disagree with the lawsuit. And in fact, I've been a part of actions in Congress to prevent it from going forward. By no stretch of the means should we be repealing the Affordable Care Act. And I am not aware of a plan to replace it. But what I do believe we need to do is strengthen the Affordable Care Act, work to lower the costs of prescription drugs, something that I have voted on in the Congress, something that I've heard from my constituents directly, that they're afraid to go to the pharmacy because of those costs. Something else I've heard from my constituents over and over again is those with pre-existing conditions can't understand why there are the repeated attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And so while this lawsuit is making its way to the Supreme Court and the outcome is unknown, I am concerned that the Affordable Care Act will be repealed. And this is why I believe in Congress, we are going to have to take the steps to stand up for everyone's health care. This is a moral right to have access to affordable care in this country. We also have been taking steps, Paula, to remove those junk insurance plans that leave people empty-handed in an emergency or in a health crisis. And it's pretty clear what the choice is here. Haley Stevens is going to protect your health care, is going to continue to stand up for people with pre-existing conditions and for our Affordable Care Act. I'm going to do that every single day, Paula, in this job, because I have heard from my constituents and my fingers on the pulse of what they need. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Esshaki?
Well, Paula, look, I've been on record multiple times voicing my frustrations with the Republican Party's continuous attempts to repeal Obamacare without a sufficient replacement that protects folks with pre-existing conditions and keeps a lot of those good things that we saw in Obamacare. But the reality of it is that Democrats own healthcare for the last 10 years, and all we've seen is our costs of healthcare continue to increase. Our premiums have gone up, which impacts our wages. We see employers paying more on the back end of people's checks so they don't get as much in take-home pay because the premiums have increased. This is a huge part of our federal expenditures with Medicare, Medicaid, and now the Obamacare subsidies as well. So we need to work moving forward. We get bogged down in the politics and the rhetoric of whether we're going to repeal and replace or fix or amend. But the bottom line is Obamacare isn't working. So there are steps that we need to take immediately to start bringing, and incremental steps, by the way, to start bringing those costs down and focusing on those costs. The reality of it is that my opponent has an ad up on TV saying that I want to repeal Obamacare and kick everybody off their health plan. The Detroit Free Press did a fact check on it. They said that it was false. Yet she continues to spend $1 million on that false ad because she doesn't want to actually talk about the policies that will start to bring those costs down. I do. I understand healthcare. I worked as a nurse for 8 years. We need to make sure we're protecting folks with pre-existing conditions. That was an important aspect of Obamacare. But Obamacare didn't do anything to decrease costs, and there's no denying that. We've seen premiums increase year after year for the last 10 years, and if we don't do something about it, we are not going to be able to provide affordable, high-quality healthcare to so many of Americans that need it. I agree that everybody deserves healthcare, but it depends. The question is, how do we get there to provide that affordable quality care to folks?
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, we'll start this next question from you, which came from a retired auto worker. What is your plan to, and we're back to 1 minute, by the way, from a retired auto worker. What is your plan to help Michigan's manufacturing community or economy?
Well, look, I think we should go back to 2 minutes because these issues are complicated, and I think we need more of a discourse on the actual policies. But when we're talking about manufacturing, we need to focus on our economy. We need to create, government exists to create and foster an environment for economic growth to occur. And one of the ways that we can do that and encourage our companies to come back to our state and to our country and improve our manufacturing base here is to have smart tax policy, is to look at some of the needless regulations that we have and start rolling those regulations back. I'm not against regulation, but I've worked in healthcare and seeing the antiquated regulations there. I've worked as an attorney and seeing the regulations there that are are serving as a clog in the system for our small businesses. So we need smart regulation, but we also can't have this bloated bureaucracy where nobody's looking at these regulations and working to improve our economy more generally through tax policy, through regulatory structure.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Well, look, Paula, I came out of the manufacturing world before going to Congress, and I have spent this first term in Congress through a program that I instituted, Manufacturing Mondays, visiting with over 70 manufacturers, getting a sense of what they do, what their workforce needs, and how I can continue to champion their issues in Congress. This is why I was a leading voice on the passage of the USMCA. That is going to increase and plus up the Buy American content, and is also going to produce real value for our manufacturers here in Michigan. I am passionate about manufacturing. We need to do supply chain resiliency and recovery coming out of this pandemic. I've got a bill for that. It's bipartisan, bicameral, and we're going to continue to stand up for everyone who works in the manufacturing sector as well, to make sure that they can retire with dignity and continue to work a good paying job.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, we'll start the next question with you. What can Congress do to make college more affordable?
Well, we certainly need to tackle the exorbitant costs of higher education, and particularly unlocking opportunities that train the next generation, not through a four-year degree program. Associate's degrees, community colleges, for those who choose to go to a four-year degree in some of these great engineering programs that we have here in Michigan's 11th district. We got to increase those Pell Grants. We've got to make it so that students aren't just paying down on their interest rates when they do take out a loan for their degree. And we also have to bring in employers. I know so many employers, I've met with them, who recruit talent and help them pay for their higher education. And so we are a test bed for this here in Michigan, and I'm excited to continue to champion these policies and opportunities for our next generation in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, Paula, it's easy with every problem that we face to say we need to throw more money at it and more money. But the reality of it is that we're $26 trillion in debt. So we need smart policies moving forward in terms of how we're going to provide more accessible education. This issue is near and dear to me. I have substantial student loans. One of the problems is we've seen inflation continue to rise, especially at our universities and in our tuition. Throwing more money at the problem has only increased those costs because we don't have universities competing based on the services that they provide. So one of the important things for me, and I've long said this, is we need to have tax deductions for student loan payments. This will not only incentivize folks to pay their student loans back, but it will help them to have more affordable college moving forward. So that would be a good start to start bringing those costs down and helping our students get through college.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, this next question you'll start. House Bill 2474, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, was passed in the House of Representatives earlier this year, which critics believe will restrict Michigan from being a right-to-work state. Do you support or oppose this bill, and why or why not?
Well, first of all, I think that our unions are important for our labor force, and I think that they serve an important function. But I also think that our workers should have choices and not be forced or coerced into joining a union if they don't want to and if they don't see the benefits themselves. The reality of it is we don't need laws to push people into unions. If unions are helping folks will automatically want to join unions. That's what makes sense. We have this knee-jerk reaction to run to Washington, to run to our state government, to pass laws to fix all of our problems, when in reality, if we have competition, if we have free markets, when it comes to our employment, also when it comes to products that we're pushing out into the economy, we have the ability to solve a lot of these problems. So look, I think that unions are generally a good thing if people want them. And if they're providing a good service, people will want them. And I think that that's sufficient.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens.
Yeah, let's be clear, Paula. I voted for HR 2474, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, and I believe that we are in the middle of a 21st century labor movement that's coming right out of Michigan, and in particular also as it relates to this pandemic. Now more than ever, do we need to protect the health and safety of our workers? We need to stand up to make sure that they have good quality health care and also the ability to save for retirement and retire with dignity. I have also spent time working with employers on the Protecting the Right to Organize Act and making sure that their voices are included as well. But case in point, Paula, this is about getting rid of the right to work policies here in Michigan that have hampered our workforce, that have strangled wages, and are frankly contributing to some of the economic downturn that we're experiencing in this state. So Protecting the Right to Organize Act has my full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, this next question you'll start. The Equal Rights Amendment has been ratified by the 38th and last state necessary to put it in the Constitution, yet the archivist has refused to do so. If elected, or in your case, or if this bill comes before you, will you vote to remove the time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment? Yes or no, and why or why not?
That's right, Paula. If reelected as the first woman to ever represent Michigan's 11th district, I am going to continue to push for the ratification of the ERA. It was such a privilege to stand with my colleagues in a historic Congress with the most women ever elected to the body in the 100-year anniversary of the passage of the right to vote for women, and hold up the ERA pictures and signs as we were standing in the Capitol together. And so this is a topic very near and dear to me, and I know to the League of Women Voters, and we've got to see this ERA ratified. Michigan was also one of the first states to push for this, so this is part of our legacy and efforts going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, I definitely support equal rights. I think that we are to that point in society, and it's unfortunate that it's taken so long to get to that point. And I'm proud as a nurse. I worked with women. I had many women bosses. I'll tell you, they run circles around many of the men that I've worked with, and I've been proud to have their leadership in my own life. When it comes to that specific bill, I haven't reviewed it substantially enough to be able to opine on it. So I will get back to your viewers on my position on that specific bill. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to say Angela Ryan, our other league member, has joined us. So she's going to be timing from now on. Mr. Esshaki, we'll start this next question with you. Do you support federal legislation to fully restore the core protections of the Voting Rights Act, which some say prevent racial discrimination in elections?
Look, I think we have problems throughout our voting system, and I think we need to work on them substantially. I also think that we have a government that's set up a particular way, so we have independent branches of that government. We defer to our Supreme Court. I think that's an important aspect of that. When we come across legislation that's been struck down by the Supreme Court, I think that it's perfectly acceptable to take a hard look at it, to ask the tough questions about what additional legislation is needed moving forward, how we protect the vote for everybody. Obviously, voting is a fundamental component of being an American, and we want to make sure that voting is accessible to everyone. So I don't want to opine on what the Supreme Court is doing. They have a separate role in our government, and we ought to respect that. But when it comes to Congress, I think that we also have an important role to make sure that we are advancing core American principles like the right to vote. And I'm happy to consistently look at this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Absolutely, Paula. Protecting the right to vote is a priority, and reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, which I voted on in the halls of Congress, is something that we've got to get done. And it was an unfortunate day when we passed it in the House of Representatives, but I saw so many colleagues on the other side of the aisle on a piece of legislation that has traditionally been so bipartisan and without question. And yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't vote for it. I served in a moment in history working with the great Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights legend. And we only have to look at what's going on around this country. And even in our own backyards, we need this Voting Rights Act legislation, and it has my support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, you'll respond first to this next question. President Trump has been vocal about his mistrust of our election system, including mail-in ballots used in Michigan and other states, and suggesting that if he loses, the election would have been rigged. Do you agree with his concerns? Why or why not?
I find these statements alarming and troubling because they are largely based on conspiracy and without fact. Many states in this country have only and exclusively been voting through absentee ballots for many years. Here in Michigan, we have an incredible voting system and an election system. I work with our clerks very closely on these topics, and I believe that we have, got to encourage everyone to vote, and we're seeing record numbers of absentee ballots coming in, being dropped off at the clerk's office. And I think that a lot of people have been very troubled and confused by these statements coming from our president, in part because they feel like they're attacking our elections unnecessarily and also threatening our democracy. And that's one of the things that's on the line this election. So we got to get out the vote for everybody. We've got to promote the accessibility of voting, and I'm going to continue to do that. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, first of all, I think everybody understands the importance of a peaceful transition of power. That said, we see story after story after story of mail-in ballots being lost. Part of that is not based on conspiracy. It's based on the fact that many states have transitioned very quickly to the mail-in form of voting and didn't have their systems up to date to be able to handle it. Our post office wasn't predicting the massive influx of mail that we see. And the reality of it is people make mistakes. And when you have a ballot that has to be sent out, it has to be sent back, it goes through multiple hands, we lose track of the chain of custody. It's easy to see where that is a circumstance that's ripe for mistakes. So I think there's a way to do it. I think it's important that everybody has the opportunity to vote. We've obviously had the ability to mail in our ballot here in Michigan in the past, but I think that we need to have systems in place to help the security of our elections.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, you'll go first on this next question. Major organizations and economists on both sides of the political aisle support putting a price on carbon pollution as a powerful method to address climate change. Do you support this? And if not, what legislation do you support to address this problem?
Well, look, I think climate change is real. I think the question is, what do we do about it? When you look at radical policies like the Green New Deal and think that they are going to reduce carbon emissions, I think that we're fooling ourselves. We've seen carbon emissions continue to reduce in this country. I think that's important, but we cannot tax our economy, the world's greatest economy, and then expect that we will still exert the same influence that we have throughout the world, when really it's the developing nations that are contributing the greatest amounts to carbon emissions. So I think we have to work hard to continue to build our economy, to continue to make it green, and reduce carbon emissions, and then be an influence on the rest of the world and lead by example with technology and innovation. And we do that through the private sector, through the free market, and the free market's been demanding this. Our corporations have been on board, and we need to continue to see those trends moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
The government is absolutely a level setter when it comes to tackling climate change. And while it's been inspiring to see many of the stakeholders in the private sector step up to set bold and ambitious goals, we need the federal government right there with it. And this is why we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. It's been very confusing and disrupting to see this current administration's attempt to remove us from the Paris Climate Accord, which was a real proven plan to lower our carbon emissions. And we've also got to bring all stakeholders to the table, Paula. This is something that I've done as a member of Congress on plastic waste. I have brought the private sector, I brought nonprofits and our municipalities together, and I continue to intend to take those approaches as we go forward in tackling climate change and reducing carbon emissions. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, you'll get this next question first. Experts say that climate change will disproportionately impact minorities and those with lesser means. What proposals would you support to assist vulnerable groups to cope with the predicted challenges?
Well, what you're talking about, Paula, is when people live in different zip codes and they experience different environmental effects. I believe in an infrastructure guarantee, certainly making sure that we've got safe and maintained roadways and bridges, but so that we have the guarantee that everyone has access to affordable resources to protect their health, but also having access to clean drinking water and clean air to breathe. And I believe that we've got to continue to support access to affordable healthcare. This is one of the things that I'm doing with the ACA in the Congress, and also other grant programs that empower municipalities and support those efforts to clean up environmental waste.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Yeah, well, just going back to the Paris Climate Accords, I mean, the reality of it is that the Chinese weren't playing by the same rules, and we can't bankrupt the world's greatest economy and expect that we are going to have an impact on the issues of carbon emission throughout the world. And so I agree with pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. If we're not going to have the developing countries play by the same rules, then I think that it makes sense that the United States can lead by example without holding themselves to a set of rules that nobody else is playing by. When it comes to helping folks, look, we are all in this together. We are the United States of America, and I think that we have an obligation to help our fellow man. This is also an issue where states need to plan, who are in particularly vulnerable areas, who have citizens that will be particularly impacted. They need to plan accordingly as well. The federal government and the state government ought to work together, but we also need to understand that there are clearly defined rules, and states understand their place better.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, you'll get this one first. How will you tackle the issues of police brutality and racism in the criminal justice system?
Well, first of all, I think we need to start treating each other with respect and dignity at all levels of society, including in our government. And we see a lot of divisive rhetoric coming from extreme elements of both sides, which only fuels a lot of these problems. We have work to do with our criminal justice system. I've long said that we need to reform it, particularly when it comes to our drug laws. We have young people who make mistakes, and those mistakes follow them for the rest of their lives, particularly when they can't get federal student loans to improve their position because they have a drug charge. I think we need to focus on police reforms as well. I was a lawyer. I read all of the constitutional cases. There are reforms that we can make, but I think it's also important that we stand by our police. These are folks that want to protect us, that ran into 2 burning buildings 20 years ago. Many of them didn't come out. And so while there's reforms to make, I think it's also an admirable profession that we need to continue to respect.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens.
We're certainly at an inflection point when it comes to racial injustice in this country, Paula. And this is why I have worked with our mayors and municipal leaders in Michigan's 11th district through an advisory council that I set up, many who are former law enforcement, to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It was absolutely horrifying earlier this year to witness the murder of George Floyd, and we've got to take action. And these are bipartisan steps to do so. If it's banning chokeholds, no-knock entries, and continuing to provide the support and resources to our police departments for standards and training. I do not support the defund the police movement. In fact, I believe we got to do exactly the opposite, which is continue to provide the resources to make change and bring criminal justice. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. A similar question along the same line. The United States has less than 5% of the world's population, but almost 25% of its prison population, thanks to a criminal justice system that disproportionately incarcerates Black, Latino, and Native Americans. What steps would you propose for ending mass incarceration?
Well, we certainly have an understanding of that problem. And I think taking a look at our for-profit prison system is a real place to start, as well as equal funding for education. It shouldn't be zip code dependent. This is something I hear in Michigan's 11th district from our community that wants everyone to succeed fairly and equally. And we've also got to chip away at recidivism and give people on-ramps to opportunities. It shouldn't be cradle to prison. It's got to be cradle to job. And there's so many opportunities all before us here throughout our district, which is a great place to live, work, and raise a family. And the work component is really what I want to hone in on, because we're losing a segment of our economy to this prison culture. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, I think the Democrats in large part own this problem. We need criminal justice reform. We need to rethink our laws. We need to rethink how many laws we are passing. You know, we ask our police to enforce the laws. Then we create all of these laws, and then we get upset when they enforce them. The problem is we have too many laws. When you look at a story like Eric Garner in New York City, he should have never been confronted by the police for selling one cigarette at a time, and unfortunately, he lost his life for doing that. We have to stop passing all of these laws that aren't keeping people safe. They're not helping anybody. I think we also need to focus on making sure that when folks do something and they pay their time, they can move on with their life instead of having crimes follow them for the rest of their lives. And that's why I said one of the important aspects of this is with our drug policy. We are ruining young people's lives for the rest of their lives and taking away opportunities that they should otherwise have because they made mistakes when they were young. And quite frankly, I think that it's wrong. I think that it's been wrong. And I think we have a lot of work to do in this area. The other aspect of this is we need a strong economy.
Thank you. Moving on to a couple of questions about international affairs. Mr. Esshaki, you're first on this one. Do you support a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And if so, how would you go about trying to achieve it?
Well, first I would start by saying I support Israel 100%. I think that we as Americans need to do that as well. Not only do we have economic interests, we work well at partnering in various technology with the Israelis. They also serve as a beacon of human rights in the Middle East, where that is few and far between. They are a democracy that believes in the same freedoms that we believe in here, and we need to continue to serve as a partner with them, both in security and in terms of an economic partner. When it comes to solutions, look, I think that the Israelis and the Palestinians need to work together to do that. I don't have a solution. I think we need to defer to them, and I think we need to be there in a supportive role when we're called upon. But I think that our unwavering support for Israel is extremely important, and we need to continue at all levels to support them.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens.
Well, look, Paula, our great Middle Eastern ally, Israel, a beautiful democracy, an incredible country that is rich with innovation and entrepreneurism, that is a terrific partner and friend of the United States, absolutely has my full support. And I believe in Israel's right to defend herself wholeheartly. I have had the privilege of working on these issues in Congress. And of course, I absolutely support a two-state solution and empower the Israelis and the Palestinians to come together to form a solution. But we're going to continue to really benefit from our partnership with Israel, both in terms of innovation capabilities for our auto sector, as well as for national security, being that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, this next question you'll start. Would you support an agreement with North Korea that entailed partial sanctions relief in exchange for some dismantling of its nuclear weapons program, but not full denuclearization?
North Korea needs to denuclearize, Paula. There's no question about it. They are a rogue nation, and they need to be treated as such. I believe that the current course of action has been somewhat unsuccessful, given that we were told that they were going to not develop nuclear weapons, and they have. They continue to serve as a threat in the region, and it's completely destabilizing in many respects. We need to be working with our allies on approach. I would absolutely support treaties and efforts to make sure that North Korea denuclearizes, but that has got to be where the buck stops. We do not need to be squishy on this. We do not need to pretend that these individuals are our friends. And frankly, we need to rein that in a big way in terms of their lack of human rights and their human rights abuses.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, I would largely disagree or agree. I'm sorry. I think denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula is important for world security. The way that we will achieve that is by being strong in our foreign affairs, by refusing to negotiate with a corrupt regime that treats its people in just horrible ways, violations of human rights. President Trump has done that. He has stood strong. He has told the North Koreans that we're not going to tolerate what they've been doing. And I think that negotiating with them, as opposed to continuing to stand strong, would be the wrong way to go.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, we'll start this next one with you. In recent years, there have been mounting concerns over government transparency, accountability, and the significant gap in the country's government ethics rules. How will you work with other lawmakers to prioritize ethic reforms in Washington?
Well, I think one of our jobs is, and what the people of Michigan and the people of the 11th Congressional District want, is leaders that will go to Washington and find folks who want to work together to improve our government, to improve our policies, to ultimately make people's lives better. And I think that the American people have a right to know what their government's doing at all levels of government, and we need to work on reforms to have more transparency. We've seen this as a problem with our approach to COVID-19. We haven't seen transparency coming from our government. We haven't received consistent information, largely because we don't have that transparency. So this is an important thing that we need to focus on moving forward, and it's something that I'm focused on tackling.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Absolutely. Transparency and accountability is so essential for repairing some of the damage that has been done, where we now see the lowest levels of trust ever in government. And this is something I've been working on in Congress, Paula, with passing the For the People Act, which would end gerrymandering and restore people's confidence in our campaign system. We've got dark money that filters in. We don't know where it comes from, and we need to have that transparency in our campaign process, just as we need transparency in government. This is why I'm one of the first people to the floor of the House of Representatives when we're in session, because I'm there to listen to my colleagues, engage in the discussion, and so that we can actually hear each other. That's the message that I'm putting back home.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, this question is for you first. What will you do to address the rise of white nationalism and the resurgence of hate crimes?
It's really quite alarming, Paula, that in the last 4 years we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism, in racism, in white supremacist groups right here in Michigan. We need to be unequivocal in disavowing hate. it starts with the words of our elected leaders, and it also starts with enforcing the laws that we have on the books. We recently saw a white supremacist attempt to kidnap our governor, and it was our incredible law enforcement and attorney general that saw to it that shouldn't happen, and that it didn't happen. We need to recognize that the words of our elected leaders very, very much matter, that it's not right to say that there are good people on both sides when white supremacists are marching in our communities. It is that we need to stand for equality and justice and love being louder.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, I agree that what our elected leaders say is very important, but I think it's important to note that we have bad people on both sides of the aisle, and we need to come out and unequivocally condemn both sides of any extremist elements, whether that's white supremacists or racists, whether that's Antifa groups that are out in our streets rioting and burning our buildings and committing violent acts. And so I condemn both sides. We've seen far too many of our leaders refuse to take that position and take that position seriously on both sides. We also have to remember that we need to treat everybody with respect and dignity, and we need to serve as examples as leaders. We don't see that enough. We don't treat each other enough with respect and dignity. We also need to recognize that racism is a problem of people's hearts and minds, and we can't always legislate that problem. The way that we can fix it is to stand up when we see inequities, to fix injustices within our system.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, this question is for you first. Do you support the White House's position not to participate in the international effort headed by the World Health Organization to develop a vaccine?
I'm sorry, you cut out at the end about the last 10 seconds.
I'm sorry, let me read it again. Do you support the White House's position not to participate in the international effort headed by the World Health Organization to develop a vaccine for the novel coronavirus?
Well, look, I think we've gotten a lot of inconsistent information coming from the World Health Organization. We've seen them covering up things early on. They've told us to not wear masks, and they've told us that we should wear masks. And I think that, quite frankly, we can rely on American ingenuity and innovation. We have the best healthcare system in the world by far right here. We've seen 90% of all new pharmaceuticals that have ever hit the market developed here. And I think that it's perfectly acceptable. And in fact, we should want to put our faith and trust in our American companies and not rely on the World Health Organization dictating to us what is going to be a safe and effective vaccine, because ultimately we need to focus on getting a safe and effective vaccine and getting it distributed as quickly as possible so we can restore our way of life.
Ms. Stevens?
I've heard from Republicans and Democrats alike that they are very alarmed that the United States is disinvesting in the World Health Organization, and that we need to be a leader in terms of the vaccine development and not insular. This is a place of difference here in terms of thinking about where our leadership as a country it is at the table, and it's got to be with everybody. When we back ourselves into the corner, we're standing there with a sword alone, and our innovation, our capabilities need to be on the world stage, and we need to be working collaboratively. As the WHO said, when this virus is anywhere in the world, it's a threat to us all. Let's rejoin the WHO.
Thank you. We have one more question before we begin our closing statements. Ms. Stevens, we'll start with you. If elected or re-elected, how will you work with both parties to get things done?
Well, certainly, Paula, this is an approach I've taken in my first term in Congress, working with Republicans and Democrats alike to pass the Building Blocks of STEM Act into law, to get the USMCA passed. I work very closely with Congressman Jim Baird from Indiana. He's a Republican from a different Big Ten state than I am here in Michigan. But we sit down and we collaborate. We hold science committee hearings on innovation strategies, on collaborative solutions to tackling our big problems like climate change. And we have a great working relationship. I believe that when we talk about the things that bring us together, we can do the things that accomplish things together. That's why I have spent this first term in Congress focused on manufacturing, workforce training, and advanced technology.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki?
Well, look, voting with your party 100% of the time is not being bipartisan, and standing on the floor of the House with pink surgical gloves screaming and yelling is not how we advocate for
Mr.
bipartisan.
Esshaki, Mr. Esshaki, if I could remind you that we do not allow personal attacks on the challenger and speak to what you would be doing.
Well, I am,
concerning this question.
and this is not a personal attack stating facts that everybody's aware of. The reality of it is, if we're going to work together, we need to focus on policy. The voters of the 11th are sending leaders to Washington so that they can find the people that want to work together to actually solve problems, to actually fix our politics, because our politics are broken. People are becoming more and more apathetic, and we need people to be more involved and more engaged in a dialogue on how we're going to actually move things forward, improve our economy, restore our way of life, and ultimately preserve the American dream.
Thank you. We'll now begin our 2-minute closing statement. Ms. Stevens, you go first on this one.
Well, thank you, Paula, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters. Listen, I am the 12th most pro-business Democrat in Congress. I'm the only Democrat in the state of Michigan who has been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Detroit Regional Chamber, and that's because I have my finger on the pulse of our economy, what's going to continue to grow our economy and get us out of this current economic downturn that we're in right now. I am passionate about what we do here in Michigan's 11th district, and I want to continue to champion what we do from the halls of Congress. And this support comes from the fact that I have been an open and transparent member of Congress who's been very dedicated to working with all of my colleagues to continue to get things done for our constituents. You know, when I hear from a veteran who is having a problem with a claim, we want to help that veteran. When I heard from dozens and countless small businesses who are experiencing the worst effects of this pandemic, that is why I stood up to make sure that we got the resources here in our district to save tens and tens of thousands of small businesses and over 100,000 Michigan jobs. And I'm going to continue to put into place those strategies to recover our supply chain, to make sure the Buy American and Made in America comes right from a place called Michigan's 11th district. I'll also say, as this district is home to about 20% of those under the age of 18, our children are watching, they are engaged, and that's who we've got to stand up for. They can't place a vote, but the work that we're doing in Congress to get that building blocks of STEM Act passed, to make sure that everyone has a good public education, that's what motivates my work every single day. So I'm asking, Haley Stevens is asking for your vote and to send this woman back to Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Esshaki, your 2-minute closing statement.
Well, thank you again, Paula, for having us. I'm grateful to be here with you. I will say that if we've learned one thing, I think there are a lot of issues, and 1-minute responses don't really help to cover everything. And so I would certainly ask that we can engage in a debate forum where we have the back and forth, where we can discuss the important issues like healthcare, which is complicated and can't be reduced to slogans and talking points like we've been so apt to do for so long in our politics. We've done that, and I hope the Congresswoman would consider taking us up on that offer. I will say we have less than 3 weeks left to go. What is at stake could not be greater, in my opinion. We have folks on the left that are focused on increasing taxes, taking over healthcare, and defunding our police. But I'm about rebuilding our economy, having smart tax policies so that innovation and entrepreneurship in our state and our country can continue to grow. We got to focus on restoring our way of life by defeating COVID-19. We do that by having a plan on how we're going to protect that 20% of folks who are particularly vulnerable to this virus. I was a nurse for 8 years. I understand healthcare. I understand what we need to do moving forward. We need to get our funding to our nursing homes and long-term care facilities. We need to make sure that we're transparent so that folks know how they can prevent the spread of this, and they know who's at risk. We need to focus on bringing those supply chains back here so that when we're faced with another crisis in the future, we can have the tools that we need to deal with it. And we need to ultimately work to continue to preserve the American dream. For me, this issue is so personal. I want my boys to grow up. I have 2 boys, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I want them to grow up in the same America that I did, with the same opportunities that I had. we're going to get there by focusing on policy, by focusing on fixing
Thank you.
politics. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This concludes our forum. We thank the candidates who are running for this office. Their willingness to serve the public and participate in politics is an important part of our democratic process. We also appreciate the voters in the 11th District who submitted questions and others who are watching this forum to learn about their choices on November 3rd. Both of these candidates were also invited to participate in the League of Women Voters Voter Guide, a publication that you can access by visiting vote411.org. By typing in your voting address, you can access all the races on your ballot, verify your voting registration, and find your polling place. Again, that's vote411.org. The print copy of this voter guide is now available in public libraries. Election Day is November 3rd. If you are not registered to vote, you can do so up through Election Day. Registration 10 days prior to Election Day must be done at the office of your city or township clerk. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., but all registered voters can vote early by absentee ballot. Remember that you first must fill out and return an absentee ballot application to your city or township clerk before a ballot can be mailed to you. If you need an absentee ballot application, contact your city or township clerk. This concludes our forum. Thank you, candidates, for participating.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Great job. Thanks. Thanks, guys.